What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Marvel Snap video. And today I actually want to look at the Marvel Snap meta tier list from Marvel Snap Zone. So ever since Zabu and Silver Surfer got nerfed, the meta has been pretty much blown wide open to a bunch of new decks emerging, a bunch of old decks coming back, people experimenting with off meta cards. So the meta is in a pretty healthy spot. For the most part, I would say at the moment, and it's pretty exciting to play Marvel Snap right now. So I'm gonna go over this tier list, kind of give you my thoughts on it, and let you know what I agree with, what I don't agree with, and things like that. Now, before we get into it, I do want to highlight this sentence here because I think it is important to keep in mind, right? The first week of the new season is always an exciting one, especially as we had some nerfs to go alongside it to promote diversity. As a result of this brand new environment, I am begging you to not take this first tier list of February 2023 as anything set in stone. Things are still moving for almost every deck on this list, whether it is the cards they include or their matchups. So I think basically what they're trying to say here is it's still early on in the season. So, you know, meta decks are still evolving, adapting, and changing, right? So nothing is set in stone. The meta is always changing and evolving. So kind of take this list with a grain of salt. But with that being said, I did look through the list beforehand, and I think it is pretty solid for the most part. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Now, first up, we have what is arguably the strongest deck in the game, and in my opinion, I think I would say it's the strongest deck in the game, and that is Shuri Zero. So Shuri is just an absolutely insane card right now. Actually, at the time of recording this, I just unlocked her today. She's a 4/2 on reveal to double the power of the next card you play. So very good with things like Red Skull. You can make a 30-point Red Skull, and then you could copy with Taskmaster, or you can do Arnim Zola to make 2 copies. You can also double She-Hulk, and then skip turn 5, and then play a 20 power She-Hulk on turn 6, along with a 20 power Taskmaster on turn 6. So a pretty insane deck list. This version runs Sauron, which not a lot of people have this card. He has an on reveal ability, remove the abilities from all ongoing cards in your hand and deck. So this is I believe he's a Series 5 card. Yeah, he's a Series 5 card, so not a lot of people have him. But he's very good in this deck because he removes the negative ongoing effects from Red Skull, Typhoid, Mary, and Ebony Maw, and Lizard as well, actually. So very good in this deck list. Now, I don't know if this is the best version of Shuri Zero. There are definitely different versions out there. There's also the KM Best version, which runs like Cosmo and Armor, which is more to tech against Shang-Chi and Arrow. So that might be the stronger deck. It's kind of hard to say, to be honest, because one, like I said earlier, the meta is still kind of changing right now since it's still early on in the season, and two, not a lot of people have Sauron, so not a lot of people can really experiment with him. But I think this is a pretty solid list, and I think I would say this is the best deck in the game right now post Zabu and Silver Surfer nerfs. So let's go ahead and move on to the next deck here, which is Zabu Control, which is really, honestly, should just be called like Sarah Control. It's really just like a Sarah deck with the new Zabu thrown in here. So the new Zabu is a 2/2, and he has an ongoing effect of your 4 cost cards cost 1 less. So there's 3 4-cost cards in this deck with Shang-Chi, Enchantress, and Rescue. I think Shang-Chi and Enchantress are very good additions in this deck list. Rescue, I think, is a little bit questionable. Like, I can definitely understand the Rescue because you don't put a lot of points on your side of the board with this deck list. This deck is really all about controlling your opponent's side of the board. So you're trying to limit as many points as your opponent plays, right? So Rescue provides you with a little bit of extra points on your side of the board. The only thing is it makes your turn 5 predictable of where you're going to play your Sarah, which, I mean, I guess that's not a big deal, but sometimes, you know, maybe on turn 5 they have a Daredevil, and then you play Rescue on one location and they Professor X the other, right? So that could be an issue, maybe, but I think what might be a bigger issue is that Rescue actually goes to 9 power once you activate the on reveal ability, so it becomes targetable by Shang-Chi. So I think Rescue definitely could be swapped out in here for maybe either like Crossbones or maybe even White Queen. I think White Queen could be good. I think Scarlet Witch could be good as well to change some unfavorable locations for you. But other than Rescue, I think the rest of the deck looks very, very solid. It seems kind of like a standard Sarah deck list that I've seen in the past from other people, with the addition of the new Zabu, which Zabu is not dead. He's just a lot more fair now. So I would agree that that's a tier 1 deck. And next up in tier 1, we have Zabu Devil Darkhawk. So this is a Darkhawk deck alongside the addition of Devil Dinosaur. Now, Darkhawk did kind of get nerfed indirectly with the Zabu nerf, because you could play Darkhawk plus another 4-cost card on turn 4, but that is no longer the case. However, Darkhawk is still a very, very strong card. So he's a 4/1 and he has an ongoing ability +2 power for each card in your opponent's deck. And you put cards in your opponent's deck with Korg, add a rock into your opponent's deck, and then Rock Slide puts 2 rocks in their deck. And then there's also going to be locations that'll actually help you out, right? Like Subterranea and then the Vibranium Mines. So it's very, very easy to get Darkhawk to double digits power. Yeah, fairly easy. You can copy him with Mystique. You can double him up with Moon Girl. And if you don't draw the Darkhawk, you have an alternate win condition with Devil Dinosaur, right? So I really do like this deck list. Quinjet is going to reduce things from your Sentinel, your Agent Coulson, Moon Girl, and White Queen. So I could see Quinjet getting a lot of value in here. Zabu gets value in here since you run 4-cost cards, and Agent Coulson is going to generate a random 4-cost card to your hand. So I think this deck list is very solid. Arrow, again, still one of the best, if not the best card in the game at the moment. So this deck list looks very, very strong, even with the nerf to Zabu. So I would agree that that is a tier 1 deck. Now here's where I'm going to disagree here. They have Lockjaw on reveal for tier 1, and I don't think this deck is tier 1. I think this deck is tier 2, maybe tier 3. So at the time of recording this, actually the featured location is the Quantum Tunnel, which is essentially Lockjaw's ability, but in a location. When you play a card here, swap it with a card in your deck. Now, I think this deck is actually very, very good for this featured location at the moment. But outside of this featured location, I would say it's a tier 2, maybe tier 3 deck. I have played this deck a bit. It is quite strong, and it is actually more consistent than I thought it would be. It's a good deck, but again, sometimes you just pull out just junk with the Lockjaw, right? Like, let's say you're playing against a Darkhawk player. They're going to put a lot of rocks into your deck. Well, sometimes you'll pull a rock out with the Lockjaw, or sometimes you'll pull out the Wasp when you don't want to. So yeah, sometimes Jubilee can pull out things you don't want to. I don't know. I think it is a good deck, but it can be vulnerable to like Shang-Chi. You know, like your Thor can get Shang-Chi'd when you use Mjolnir. She-Hulk, Magneto, Chavez, Infinite can all be killed by Shang-Chi. Dracula cannot be, however, but you can move Dracula around with Magneto, or sometimes people will play Maximus to try and mess up your discard. So I think this is a strong deck, but personally, I'm not a huge fan of Lockjaw decks, if I'm being honest with you. I'm just not a big fan of the randomness factor. Now, with that being said, I did say that I think this deck is more consistent than I actually thought it would be. I do like the Jane Foster being able to draw the Wasp and the Mjolnir from your deck. So I really do think deck thinning is very strong in Marvel Snap, considering you only have 12 cards in your deck. So I think this is a very solid deck, but personally, I would not have it at tier 1. I would say tier 2, maybe tier 3. So moving on to tier 2, we have Galactus. And Galactus at tier 2, I think I can agree with. I think that's a pretty solid assumption. I think the problem with Galactus, it's a very predictable deck. Like, you see things like Electro and Wave. Like, you just know you're going to get hit with a Galactus, right? The Spider-Man, I'm kind of go back and forth on Spider-Man. Like, Spider-Man is very good for winning games, but he's not very good for winning cubes, because if you play Spider-Man on turn 5, let's say you play Galactus on turn 4, Spider-Man on turn 5, and your opponent can't play anything on turn 6, well, then your opponent is just going to retreat and you're only going to get maybe like 2 or 4 cubes instead of like 8 cubes, right? Now, however, I will say the new card Ghost just came out, which let me bring up Ghost's ability right now. Actually, we're doing this live. Let's bring up Ghost. So Ghost just came out, and Ghost has an ongoing ability, says that your cards are always revealed last. Their on reveal abilities happen last. So I think Ghost is actually going to be a very, very strong addition into Galactus decks, because Galactus decks do not want priority, meaning they do not want to reveal their cards first, because they want to play their big units like Death, Chavez, Null, and not have them Shang-Chi, right? And you want to Shang-Chi your opponent's big units. So that's why Galactus decks do not want priority. And also, there's a lot of Marvel Snap news going on, man. There's something always going on. Null is actually dropping to Series 4, so this card is very good in Galactus decks, and it's going to be more accessible to more players. So I think this is a pretty solid deck list, and I think when more people have Null, people are going to be experimenting with it more, different builds, and I think Ghost is going to make this deck better as well. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say though, because me personally, I don't have Galactus and I don't have Null, so I haven't really experimented a lot with these two cards, but I have played against Galactus decks a lot, and the biggest problem is that it's predictable. So even sometimes, like when you can predict they're gonna play Galactus, like you just retreat. And I think Galactus decks, they do win a lot, but they don't win a lot of cubes. So I think you will climb steadily with a Galactus deck, but you might not climb as quickly as you would with some other surprise 8 cube decks, right? So I think this is a very, very solid Galactus list here. And moving on, we have Zabu Negative. Now, this deck is actually pretty cracked. This deck is cracked. I played something similar to this, not exactly, because I don't have Bast, but I think Bast is actually very good in this list. But now with the nerf of Zabu, right? I mean, it was a nerf, but now we have another option to pull out Mr. Negative on turn 3, because originally it was just Psylocke, right? Psylocke is a 2 energy card. You play her on turn 2. Next turn you get +1 energy, so you can play Mr. Negative on turn 3. Well, Zabu makes your 4 cost cards cost 1 less, and he's 2 energy now. So you have 2 options to play Mr. Negative on turn 3, which is very, very good. Now, this deck is tier 2. I think I want to agree with that. I'm kind of like borderline tier 1, tier 2. It is more consistent now that you have Psylocke and Zabu. The problem is if you don't draw Mr. Negative, like this deck just feels very bad. It's kind of like an all or nothing deck, right? Like either you get Psylocke and Zabu and Mr. Negative in hand and you snap, or you don't draw Mr. Negative and you retreat. So it is a very, very strong deck. Now the Silver Surfer is I feel like you don't even really need Silver Surfer in this deck list. Like you can just make like a Mr. Negative deck list without Silver Surfer and just kind of put like there's a whole bunch of different options you can do, right? You could add like Shuri, Black Panther, Arnim Zola, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of build negative decks. But yeah, this deck is very, very strong, but you have to draw all the key combo pieces. So I guess I would say tier 2 is accurate, since it is more consistent than previous seasons, I think, with the new Zabu. But again, when it's, when you don't draw your negative, it feels really, really bad. So I think tier 2, I guess that's okay. Now, Death Wave. Death Wave is a deck that's been around for a long time. Pretty standard deck list here, actually. The only thing is She-Hulk is kind of one of the like newer inclusions to this deck, right? I still think this deck is very, very solid. It kind of went away in the meta a little bit because there was the Leech meta, the Leech Leader meta, where those cards were very popular, and that was kind of in response to this deck, right? So now that Leader has been nerfed, I think this deck is kind of re-emerging again. And this deck is pretty solid. It's kind of just, you know, good old-fashioned points on the board, get ahead, play arrow, play your death, play your She-Hulk, and just win the game. So tier 2, pretty solid deck list. Next up, we have Patriot. Patriot, tier 2, I can respect it. I can respect it. I think it's definitely like maybe like towards the bottom tier 2, maybe upper tier 3. Now I do really like playing Patriot. I think it's always kind of like not necessarily a sleeper because people know Patriot exists, but people don't really play Patriot that often. I guess because people think he's boring. But I don't know. I think he's pretty fun. I think he's always a solid deck list. I guess the problem with Patriot is that it's a very predictable deck. Like, as soon as you see either Misty Knight or Shocker come down, you're like, oh, they're playing Patriot. So I think that's the problem with it. I guess that's why people don't play it very often. Now, the one thing I will say I don't like about this deck list is I don't like that it has Squirrel Girl and Debris and Ultron together. Now, I do like Ultron in Patriot. I think Ultron is very, very good in Patriot, but I don't like Squirrel Girl and Debris. I feel like you're clogging up your lanes like so much because you're going to fill them up with Ultron anyways, unless maybe you don't draw Ultron, I guess. But still, I feel like you're just kind of clogging up your locations a little bit too much. Debris, I guess I could understand Debris a little bit better to counter Galactus decks. But Squirrel Girl, I personally, for me, I think I would take Squirrel Girl out of this. Maybe even turn this into like a Patriot Silver Surfer deck. There's a lot of different ways you can play it, right? You can maybe also add in Cosmo here as a tech card. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but personally, I'm not too big of a fan of having Squirrel Girl and Ultron in the same deck list. With that being said, it's still a pretty solid deck list overall. Next up, we have Discard Lockjaw. And Discard got a pretty significant buff with the addition of MODOK here. So this list is okay for the most part. What I will say is I'm not really a fan of Infinite in here. Like, I get you want to discard Infinite with Dracula, but most of the time, if you can discard your whole hand with MODOK, you're just going to end up discarding Dracula then. So, yeah, Infinite, I'm not big on here, if I'm being honest. Swordmaster and Moon Knight, I'm not really a fan of the random discards either. Now, I do like these cards, but yeah, again, I'm not a huge fan of the random discards. Like, I really like Colleen and Lady Sif, because Colleen's going to discard the lowest cost card in your hand, which is usually going to be Swarm, and Lady Sif is going to target the highest cost card in your hand, which is usually going to be Apocalypse. And there's no Lady Sif in this deck, so I gotta say, I think this is not a great discard deck, if I'm being honest here. I would probably throw in Wolverine. I think the new buffed Wolverine, like, people are playing him in destroy decks. I think he's actually pretty decent now in discard, because Colleen will discard either Swarm or Wolverine as long as you got your Morbius out of your hand. Hellcow, I do like Hellcow, but I would put in Lady Sif, honestly. You can maybe try Collector as well. I've seen people do that. You can also do Sunspot, you can do Blade, you can do Nightcrawler. So I'm not a huge fan of this exact deck list. I think my discard Lockjaw deck list is better than this. But it's still kind of like a solid shell overall, right? Like, really, like, the key cards you need are like Morbius, Swarm, Colleen, Dracula, MODOK, Apocalypse, Chavez, and I would definitely add Lady Sif in here. Take out one of these cards, add in Lady Sif. But yeah, I guess this is a tier 3 deck. I would say maybe tier 2. The thing is, discard can kind of be inconsistent sometimes, but man, when you hit all the right pieces, like you play your Morbius, then you play your MODOK, and your Morbius gets big, you got a big Apocalypse in your hand, you got a whole bunch of Swarms on your hand, like, it's very hard to beat. But again, it can be a little bit inconsistent. I would maybe say tier 2, maybe towards the bottom end of tier 2, maybe even better than Patriot. I don't know. It's a little bit hard to say. Next up in tier 3, we have the good cards Devil Dinosaur. I think Devil Dinosaur is just always going to be relevant in the meta, unless they like drastically change him somehow. This looks like a pretty decent list for the most part. It looks kind of similar to the Darkhawk deck list, but instead of Darkhawk and Korg and Rockslide, you have a couple other cards in here like Sunspot and She-Hulk and Armor and things like that. I mean, a pretty standard Devil Dinosaur deck. Yeah, I think tier 3 is a fair assumption to make for this one. Then we have Hella Discard at tier 3. Now, Hella Discard, I will say, I think it's the inferior version of discard decks right now. I think the more traditional, like Morbius Apocalypse discard is the better of the two, because I think this version is a little bit more predictable with the Hela and the Invisible Woman. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of Hela decks, if I'm being honest with you. I don't really like how random they are. I think they're even more random than the Morbius Apocalypse version. I think that list is more consistent because you have Lady Sif and Colleen here. And this one is just Lady Sif. So yeah, I'm not too big of a fan of this one. I think it's less inconsistent than the other discard deck. Definitely a fun deck, but less consistent in my opinion. And last in tier 3, we have Cerebro 2. Cerebro 2 is a decent deck. I will admit I'm not a Cerebro master myself. I don't play a lot of Cerebro, but I would say Cerebro 2 is the most popular Cerebro deck and probably the best performing one as well. Now, I don't know if I would throw in Hazmat Luke Cage here. Luke Cage I can understand, since there are various locations that mess up your Cerebro, right? You have Luke Cage to kind of not have your cards, their power get reduced by those tricky locations, as well as Scorpion Storm to also deal with tricky locations. Yeah, Hazmat, I mean, I guess you can have Hazmat in here, but yeah, it's not the best thing ever, right? M'Baku, I do like M'Baku. I don't have M'Baku, but I wish I had him because he is such a fun card. Like, he's not an amazing card by any means, but I have seen so many like clips where M'Baku wins the game, and it's just hilarious. Like, M'Baku is such a fun card here. But yeah, I think I would agree with this deck being tier 2 because it is a decent deck, but there's just so many things that can go wrong with it, like locations, again, Scorpion hitting your hand, or something discarding your hand, or the tokens that spawn on the board, right, like Monster Island. I think this is a decent deck, but by no means top tier deck. I think tier 3 is pretty fair. And then they have tier 4, more data needed, which is fair. I mean, the meta is still pretty early on, so nothing in tier 4 at the moment. Not going to go over the budget decks because those are really just like pool 1, pool 2 decks. And then silent performers of the week, we have Thanos Ongoing Zoo. Now, I actually think Thanos is really good right now. I don't have Thanos myself because I just don't have that many tokens, and I haven't got him from a reserve. Like, I haven't gotten lucky with him, but I think Thanos is actually really good. The thing that makes Thanos good is like it's the stones, right? Like, the stones have so much value, and they're kind of like a little bit unpredictable, right? Because each stone has just like it's a different kind of like a, I don't want to necessarily say like each stone is like a tech card, but each stone is like a utility card. Like, the Reality Stone, being able to change a location, like it's like having a Scarlet Witch for 1 energy, right? And then you have the Space Stone. I think it's a Space Stone, right? The one that can move a card to another location. Like, the stones provide so much utility to the deck. It's pretty insane. And then you have an alternate win condition with the Devil Dinosaur. Mojo can trigger pretty easily. Then you can buff all the stones with Khazar, Blue Marvel, buff all your ongoing cards with Spectrum. So I think this deck is actually really good. I think the reason it's in the silent performers category is because not a lot of people own Thanos. Which is fair, which is accurate. Like myself included, I don't have Thanos, so I think that's why it's in the silent performers category. But if I were to actually put this within a tier, I would put this maybe towards like the top of tier 2, maybe bottom tier 1. Yeah, maybe upper tier 2. I think this is a very good deck, and I think once more people unlock Thanos, they're gonna see how strong he actually is. Then we have Surfer Move. This is actually the only kind of true surfer deck, right? There's the negative surfer, but I don't really count that as a surfer deck. I think it's more of a Mr. Negative deck. We have the surfer move deck, which caught popularity a couple weeks ago, and I haven't played this version of Silver Surfer myself. I've played a lot of different Silver Surfer decks, pre-nerf and post-nerf. I think Silver Surfer is a lot weaker now. He is a 3/2 now, and his on reveal effect is give your other 3-cost cards +2 power. It used to be +3 power, and he was 0 power himself. Yeah, I think this deck is decent. Like Vulture, even if you move Vulture once, he gets to +8, right? And then you can buff him +2, goes to a 10. I like the 3-cost cards here. I like Storm, Doctor Strange, Juggernaut. I like all of these. And Arrow is just good in any deck, of course. Yeah, I think this is a pretty decent deck list, but if I'm being honest, I don't think Silver Surfer is like he went from being like one of the best decks to like one of the, I don't want to say he's one of the worst decks because he's not like dead. He's not like a dead card, but he's significantly worse than what he used to be. Like if you're trying to climb, I don't know if I would actually recommend playing a Silver Surfer deck at the moment because, one, they're pretty predictable, and two, it's just not as strong anymore. Like the thing with Silver Surfer before the nerf was, even though it was predictable, like it would just output an insane amount of points that it didn't even matter, right? It didn't even matter that your opponent knew the Silver Surfer was coming. Like you just throw Silver Surfer down and win the game pretty much. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't recommend playing Silver Surfer. I could, yeah, so Silent Performer, I guess that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Next up, the last one actually is the She-Hulk combo. So this is just kind of like a combo deck where you play Sunspot on turn 1, you play Moon Girl on turn 4, Magic turn 5, skip turn 6, and then you can play Infinite and She-Hulk in the same turn. I haven't seen a lot of people playing this deck list. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, from my personal experience, I haven't seen a lot of people playing it, but I definitely could see this maybe, you know, working. But I feel like it's kind of predictable because if you play the Magic and you skip turn 6 and you see a little Sunspot animation pop up, like, you know, either Infinite or She-Hulk or both are coming, right? So I don't know. I think this deck is kind of predictable. Yeah, I like the Viper and Hood combo, but it seems kind of random in this deck. I do like the addition of Titania. It does seem kind of random. Carnage, the only thing for Carnage to eat is the Hood. I guess maybe the random tokens on the board. I don't know. This is kind of a weird deck list, to be honest. This is kind of a weird deck list. I don't know if I would recommend playing this to try and climb. If you're trying to have fun and you're trying to, maybe you just unlock She-Hulk, go ahead, try this deck out. But if you're actually trying to climb seriously, I don't know if I'd actually recommend playing this deck. It seems decent, but not anything spectacular. So that was the tier list from Marvel Snap Zone. Go check them out. They do great work over there. I think there's only a couple things I disagreed with. For the most part, I would say this is a pretty solid tier list. I'll go ahead and leave a link for this tier list down in the description below so you can take a look at it for yourself, take a look at all the decks. And again, like they said themselves in the article, you know, it's the first week of a new meta, so everything's changing, nothing's set in stone yet, so just keep that in mind. And thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate you. Let me know if you want to see more of these meta kind of breakdown videos. Maybe if you want to see them once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. And if you did, I would appreciate if you like and subscribe. Trying to hit 2,000 subscribers. We are a little bit over 1,200. So thank you if you have subscribed already. If you have not, I would love to see you subscribe. Join the Discord. Link for it's in the description down below. Talk Marvel Snap with me. Share your deck list with the community and whatnot. Oh, and one more other thing is I did not do last week's Saturday showcase where I show off decks from the community. That's because I was playing in the Snap Clash streamer tournament. So that will resume this Saturday. But once again, thank you guys for watching the video. And if you stayed to the end of this video, the key word is going to be silent. So if you stayed all the way to the end of the video, type in silent in the comments and I'll know you stayed to the end and that you're a real one for that. So once again, thank you for watching. Appreciate you. See you in the next one. Later.